Get your hands off me. The sharp voice cut through the silence at gate 23 like a blade. The muscular arm of Owen Hale, a 39-year-old security officer, clamped hard around the arm of a black woman. His eyes were cold as ice, his fingers digging so deep they left marks on her skin. First-class passengers waiting in line froze. A few phones lifted, cameras rolling, expecting to capture some airport drama. Owen tilted his head, sneering. You need to step aside. This gate is for first class only. What makes you think you belong here? The woman wore plain jeans and a light cotton shirt. No designer bag, no luxury watch. Everything about her seemed too ordinary, too unworthy. The name on her boarding pass, Alexis King. Age 41. But to Owen, she was nothing more than someone in the wrong place. Alexis pulled the boarding pass from her pocket and held it up. I have a first-class ticket. This is my place. Owen glanced at it, then smirked. Sure, and I'm the pilot of this Boeing 707. Fake ticket. Don't think you can fool me. This is the end of the line. A laugh erupted from behind. Gregory Stanton, a wealthy businessman in an expensive suit, leaned back with a smug grin. Security should check how she even got in here. Doesn't look like someone who could afford first class. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some passengers nodded, some muttered, some stared at Alexis with a cruel delight. Shame burned in her chest like acid. Her arm throbbed under Owen's crushing grip, but she didn't struggle, didn't resist. She could have. Years of military training meant she could snap his wrist in 2 seconds flat. But she didn't. She simply locked eyes with him and said, calm and firm, "You're hurting me." Owen tightened his grip, leaning close to her ear, his whisper a venomous insult. Good. Remember this next time. Don't dream of stepping where you don't belong. Someone like you should be at the back of the plane. The words cut like a knife. Alexis drew a deep breath. 15 years of military service had forged steel in her veins, but the sting of humiliation still burned raw. Then, the loudspeaker crackled, a sharp announcement shattering the heavy air. Ladies and gentlemen, attention! The captain of Flight 447 has collapsed in the cockpit. Emergency request. Any military pilot on board, identify yourself immediately. Silence. A few gasps. The phones that had been recording the scuffle now trembled, capturing chaos instead. Alexis turned to Owen. Her eyes blazed, cold and fierce all at once. Her voice thundered, each word like a hammer blow. Colonel Alexis King, United States Air Force. Owen froze. His hand shook violently before dropping away. His face drained of color in an instant. Around them, the air flipped. The same people who had laughed stood petrified. Elaine Stanton, Gregory's wife, whispered in horror, "My God, he just assaulted an Air Force colonel." The boarding gate erupted in shock. The woman in the faded cotton shirt, the one they thought was an imposter, was the very person the entire flight was now desperate for. Alexis peeled his hand off her arm, her movement decisive yet calm. She read his name tag aloud. "Officer Hale, you just assaulted a federal military officer in front of 200 witnesses. You'd better call your supervisor right now." Linda Park, the gate attendant, rushed forward, her face flushed red with panic. "Colonel King, I am so sorry. The crew needs you immediately." Alexis gave a firm nod and strode forward, her back straight, her steps unwavering. Yet inside, an invisible wound cut deep. The bitter truth that in this country, sometimes skin color and clothing alone were enough to decide whether you were deemed worthy. Behind her, Owen's voice shook over his radio. "Dispatch requesting immediate backup at Gate 23. We have a situation." But he was wrong. The situation was 100 times larger than he imagined. Within the next hour, the very woman he had humiliated would not only save 312 lives, but also expose the deep-rooted prejudice running through the heart of Seattle's airport. And in the waiting area, Gregory Stanton, who had once laughed at Alexis's humiliation, now swallowed hard, asking himself, had he just mocked the wrong person? The answer would come swiftly, because Flight 447 had just taken off straight into the fiercest storm in recorded history. And the woman they all dismissed was their last hope. The sound of the cabin door closing was like a blade slicing through the air, sealing off the outside world from the 312 souls inside the Boeing 707. The once luxurious atmosphere of first class grew heavy with the news. Captain Robert Hayes, a veteran with 23 years of experience, was unconscious in the cockpit. Alexis King stepped into the cabin. Every eye turned toward her. Some whispered, some snapped photos. Others stared with a mix of doubt and disbelief. A black woman in a plain cotton shirt just dragged at the gate, now being announced as an Air Force colonel. Too hard to believe for many. In Seat 1C, Gregory Stanton propped his elbow on the armrest, trying to mask his unease, but his wife Elaine's eyes betrayed the truth. Shame, and the realization that they had mocked their would-be savior. In the cockpit, First Officer Ethan Rivera, just 28 years old, was drenched in sweat. He had never flown alone in a Category 5 storm, and this storm was unlike anything in the manuals. Monstrous air currents and lightning tearing the sky apart like flaming blades. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Flight 447. Captain incapacitated. Request immediate assistance." Ethan's shaky voice crackled through the radio. The cabin jolted violently. A little girl screamed and clutched her mother. Suited businessmen, once projecting authority, now trembled like recruits. Old hands gripped seats in silent prayer. Alexis sat down in Seat 2A, closed her eyes, and drew a deep breath. Amid the howl of wind, memories flooded back. Endless nights over Middle Eastern battlefields, the rattle of an F-22 under anti-aircraft fire, and the last whisper of her wingmate Sara Delgado before she died. Never let silence kill the truth. Alexis's eyes snapped open. She knew that in mere minutes, the very people who had dismissed her would place their lives entirely in her hands. The irony cut deep, but so did the responsibility. A chime rang. Ethan appeared at the cabin door, pale and trembling. "Please, is there anyone with military flight experience? I need help." His voice cracked in desperation. Gregory Stanton jumped up. "I've flown private jets for 20 years. I know emergency procedures. I can help you." A few passengers nodded, relieved to find a supposed savior. Gregory straightened his jacket, lifted his chin high. Alexis rose to her feet. Just that single motion silenced the cabin. Colonel Alexis King, 2,000 flight hours in F-22s, specialist in emergency navigation through storms and combat zones. I am here. The air froze. Ethan's eyes widened. Passengers gawked in disbelief. Then a hiss came from the back. She doesn't look like a colonel. She's bluffing. Gregory seized the chance, sneering. See, Ethan? This woman was just dragged away by security. She dresses like that, and we're supposed to believe she flew fighter jets. Don't hand over our lives to a fantasy. Doubt rippled through the rows. An elderly woman whispered, "She looks too young. Can she really?" Alexis felt each stab of suspicion, swallowed hard, and stepped forward. Every step was a vow to Sarah, to herself. Never let prejudice decide who lives and who dies. Ethan, trembling, looked at her, voice breaking. "Colonel, do you actually know how to fly this aircraft?" Alexis stopped, eyes blazing, voice as sharp as a command on the battlefield. "I have flown aircraft far more complex than this, through firestorms far worse than this, and I brought my people home. If you want to live, let me into that cockpit." Silence blanketed the cabin. Outside, thunder cracked like a war drum, as if the sky itself tested her words. The cockpit door swung open. Inside, Captain Hayes lay motionless, face ashen, heartbeat faint. Warning alarms flashed red across the panels. Ethan clung to the yoke, straining to keep the giant steel bird from tearing apart. Gregory refused to yield, his voice hard and arrogant. "Don't let a delusion decide our fate. I paid $18,000 for this first-class seat, and I won't die at the hands of someone who doesn't fit the pilot look." Alexis turned to him, her gaze like a blade cutting through the veil of bias. "Mr. Stanton, today, your money can't fly this aircraft, but my experience can." The plane shook violently, lights flickering. Passengers screamed. Ethan glanced at Alexis, then at the instruments, then nodded firmly. "Colonel King, I am officially requesting your assistance. We'll fly together." Alexis slid into the Seco pilot's seat. Thunder roared outside, fierce as a battle drum. And in that very moment, the fate of 312 lives shifted into the hands of the woman they had once dismissed. The storm tossed the Boeing 707 like a cheap toy. Metal rattled violently. Cabin lights flickered non-stop. Every scream and whispered prayer pressed against the cockpit door like an unbearable weight on Ethan Rivera and Colonel Alexis King. Ethan, drenched in sweat, gripped the yoke with white knuckles, his voice cracking through the roar of the wind. "We're at 37,000 feet. Crosswinds beyond tolerance. I don't know how much longer I can hold her." Alexis leaned forward, eyes scanning the control panel, flashing with urgent red warnings. She laid a steady hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me. Breathe. I need altitude, speed, remaining fuel." Ethan swallowed hard and rattled off the numbers like a machine. The moment he finished, Alexis nodded sharply. Her voice cut through the chaos like an arrow. "We need to descend immediately into lower air. Climbing is suicide." Just then, the door slammed open. Gregory Stanton stormed in, his face flushed crimson, voice bellowing above the thunder. "She'll kill us all. We have to climb. I've logged hundreds of hours on private jets. I know what it takes to clear a storm." He dropped into the jump seat, pointing a commanding finger at Ethan. "You're young, inexperienced. Listen to me, or we all die." The cockpit air thickened. Ethan looked at Gregory, then at Alexis. The world spun inside his eyes. On one side, the wealthy man in an expensive suit, voice booming with authority. On the other, the woman dragged in humiliation at the gate, now seated here with every movement radiating the authority of a seasoned pilot. Gregory didn't let him think. He leaned forward, snarling. "Listen to me now. Full thrust. Climb to 42,000 feet. Up there it's clear. Calm. Don't let someone who doesn't belong here decide our fate." Alexis never turned. She kept her eyes fixed on the instruments, her voice steady, cold. "Mr. Stanton, climbing in these conditions will shear the wings. Wing separation. Do you understand what that means? 312 lives shredded in the sky." "Oh," Gregory scoffed, sneering. "Don't throw jargon at me. Anyone can read a manual." Alexis tilted her head slightly, then began reciting, slow and precise. "Emergency checklist. Disengage autopilot. Throttle back. Deploy speed brakes. Descend at 4,000 feet per minute. Maintain 250 knots below 10,000 feet. Silence engulfed the cockpit. Ethan lifted his head, eyes blazing. "That's the Boeing 777 procedure, word for word from the training manual. How do you know it by heart?" Alexis lifted her chin. "Because I've flown aircraft more complex than this, through firestorms far worse, and because I helped Boeing build those emergency protocols." Gregory froze, thunder outside punctuating his silence. Ethan turned to Alexis, voice trembling but filled with hope. "Colonel King, I'm officially turning over control. Help me keep this bird alive." Alexis pulled her seat closer, her hands calm as they settled on the controls. The storm raged outside, but in that moment she was a conductor before an orchestra of chaos. Every switch, every lever became a note in her command. Gregory wasn't finished. He lunged forward, his voice hissing. "No! She has no authority here. This isn't a battlefield. This is commercial aviation. We don't need a soldier. We need a real pilot." Alexis turned at last, locking eyes with him. Her voice was low but steel, cold. "You're right. I don't belong here. I belong in the cockpit of an F-22 in the middle of gunfire. But today, 312 people need me here. And that makes this exactly where I belong." Ethan held his breath. Passengers still screamed beyond the door, but in the cockpit, her words struck like a hammer. Gregory faltered, lips moving without sound. Alexis pulled the yoke. The Boeing 777 tilted, descending into lower air. The aircraft shuddered violently, but the nose steadied. Some warnings shifted from red to amber. Ethan's eyes darted between the gauges and Alexis, a spark of life igniting in his gaze for the first time. Gregory, face burning, clutched the seat with trembling hands. He didn't know his prejudice tirade had been recorded by the cockpit system, and would soon serve as a damning verdict against his reputation. Alexis didn't care. She focused on her steady breathing, on her hands guiding the giant bird through the storm. Everything else, the scorn, the noise, the doubt, was left behind. In her mind echoed only one promise. Never let prejudice decide who lives and who dies. And this time, that promise was holding an entire sky together. The engines roared, warning alarms shrieked without pause. The massive jet thrashed like a child in the ruthless grip of nature's storm. Alexis King gripped the controls, her eyes locked on the trembling gauges. Every needle, every digit shook violently in the chaos. Ethan Rivera clenched his jaw, sweat pouring down his neck, whispering in near despair. "Colonel, this storm is beyond anything I've ever seen. We need eyes. Civilian radar won't cut it." Alexis nodded, her voice sharp and steady. "Patch through Seattle Air Traffic Control. Request immediate connection to McCord Air Force Base." Ethan blinked, stunned. "McCord? That's a military channel. They'll never authorize." "Do it," Alexis cut him off. "They'll take me." Ethan hesitated, but complied, his voice breaking through static. "Seattle Control, this is Flight 447. Emergency request. Direct connection to McCord Air Force Base. Captain incapacitated. We need military satellite data." A tense silence followed. Then a reply came, crisp as a bugle call. "Flight 447, this is Seattle Control. Relaying to McCord now. Stand by." The cockpit shook violently, but in Alexis's eyes, a spark of hope flared. Then a female voice cut through the storm, calm yet commanding. "Flight 447, this is McCord Base Operations. Brigadier General Naomi Chen speaking. Confirm the identity of the person at the controls." Ethan opened his mouth, but Alexis seized the mic, her voice ringing with urgency and pride. "McCord, this is Colonel Alexis King, United States Air Force. Call sign, Spectre." A beat of silence. Then Naomi Chen's voice shifted, tinged with surprise and relief. "Spectre, confirmed. We've been monitoring from the start. Transmitting full satellite data to your system. The Secretary of Defense is overseeing. You have full authority." In that instant, the cockpit seemed to pause. Not because the storm calmed, but because recognition ignited the cramped space like a flare. Ethan turned to her, his eyes stripped of doubt, filled now with awe. Behind them, Gregory Stanton went rigid, his voice faltering. "Spectre, they know you." Alexis didn't turn. Her gaze fixed on the screen, now alive with military satellite imagery, swirling storm cells mapped in brutal detail. "This storm isn't an enemy," she murmured, half to herself. "It's a maze, and every maze has an exit." Naomi Chen's voice returned. "Spectre, sensors confirm the eye wall is opening southwest, 40 nautical miles out. Recommend descent to 15,000 feet, heading 270. Alexis shook her head firmly. "Negative. We're going down to 8,000, cutting through the southern wall, low and fast, just like running anti-aircraft fire." A pause, then Naomi's voice carried respect. "Spectre, you rewrite the playbook every time you take off. McCord fully supports. Godspeed." Ethan stared, voice trembling. "Colonel, this is commercial, not combat. Can this jet even survive that dive?" Alexis leaned in, her hands steady on the yoke, her eyes blazing in the red strobe light. "This plane wasn't built for combat storms, but I was built to survive them." The words sliced through Ethan's fear like steel. He nodded hard. "Copy. Spectre, I'm with you." Behind them, Gregory sat frozen, face drained of all color. For the first time in his life, money and status held no weight. He was nothing but a powerless passenger, watching the woman he had mocked carry the sky on her shoulders. The storm still howled outside, but inside the cockpit there was no chaos. This was Alexis King's battlefield, where a single miscalculation meant death, and where courage itself became the only map out. The massive Boeing 737 shook like a crumpled leaf. Lightning split the sky again and again, flooding the cockpit with blinding white light before plunging it back into suffocating darkness. The wind shrieked like thousands of blades, scraping against the fuselage. Alexis King gripped the yoke, her heart steady, her breath impossibly calm. To her eyes, the spiraling winds were no longer chaos. They were rhythm, a flow she could read. Throttle down to 65%. Heading 210. Prepare to deploy speed brakes, Alexis commanded, her voice as composed as a field order. Ethan Rivera obeyed instantly, his trembling hands steadied as though anchoring themselves to Alexis's heartbeat. Outside, the plane tilted sharply, its belly brushing the violent currents. Screams poured in from the cabin, but Alexis never blinked. She eased the jet lower, meter by meter. Threading through invisible gaps civilian radar could never reveal. Suddenly, a shout cut through the storm. "You're going to kill us!" Gregory Stanton lunged forward, clutching the back of Alexis's seat, his eyes bloodshot. "Pull us higher! You're dragging us straight into hell!" Ethan barked. "Sit down, now!" But Gregory's voice cracked with defiance. "You're trusting someone who was dragged out of the first-class gate. She doesn't belong here." Alexis never turned her head, her eyes locked on the storm. But when she spoke, her words froze the cockpit. "Mr. Stanton, I've heard you don't belong here my whole life. At the academy, on the battlefield, in the boardroom. And every time, I proved the place I stood was exactly where I was needed most." She pulled the yoke. The massive jet dropped in a steep descent, plunging as though into a void. The cabin erupted in screams. Luggage clattered violently, but as the jet dove, the nose stabilized. The storm's vortex fell behind them. Warning lights dimmed. Only a few amber signals flickered. Ethan gasped, voice cracking. "My God, you just used a forced descent to break through the turbulence layer." Alexis gave a brief nod, her eyes locked on the instruments. "In combat, sometimes you dive into death itself to find life." Gregory froze, gripping the seat rail, his face burning red. But before he could spit out another word, the radio crackled. Brigadier General Naomi Chen's voice rang out, firm, yet tinged with awe. "Spectre, we are recording your entire flight path. What you're doing has never been documented in commercial aviation. This is training gold." Alexis answered curtly. "Not data. 312 lives, and I'm not losing one." Ethan snapped at Gregory, his voice hard as steel. "Mr. Stanton, if you interfere again, I'll have the crew restrain you. This isn't a boardroom. This is a battlefield, and there is only one commander." Gregory stumbled back, his fists clenched, his voice gone. In his eyes flickered a new fear, not of the storm, but of the truth that his power meant nothing against skill. Alexis focused. Each jolt of turbulence became another note in the storm's symphony. She adjusted every brake, every bank, molding the lumbering 707 into a warbird, slipping it through razor, thin gaps between destruction. In the cabin, panic ebbed. Passengers felt the change. No longer free fall, but deliberate flight. A fragile hope flickered, row by row. Alexis did not look back. She whispered instead, as if to herself, as if to her fallen comrade, Sara Delgado. "I will not leave anyone behind. Not this time." The storm still howled, but in the cockpit there was a strange silence. The silence of control reclaimed. The Boeing 707 shuddered in the darkness. The storm still lashed at the fuselage like furious blows, but inside the cockpit, the rhythm of breathing had changed. No longer filled with desperate cries, it was now consumed by absolute focus. Colonel Alexis King and Ethan Rivera moved as if they were a single set of wings, one giving orders, the other executing them. In the passenger cabin, eyes began to shift. The woman who had been dragged away by security at the gate now sat in the co-pilot seat. Every movement she made, even though unseen, was felt in the cabin through the growing steadiness of the flight. A small boy lifted his head from his mother's shoulder and whispered, "Mom, the plane isn't falling anymore." His mother held him tighter, tears welling in her eyes. But amid the fragile light of hope, a voice rose, rough and venomous, trying to shatter it. Gregory Stanton. He could not accept defeat, could not accept being outshined by a black woman right before his eyes. He leapt to his feet, storming towards the cockpit door, his voice booming through first class. "Listen to me. Don't be fooled. She's only pretending to be in control. We are putting our lives in the hands of someone who was dragged out of the first-class gate under suspicion of fraud." Murmurs rippled through the cabin once more. Eyes flicked uneasily from face to face. Some nodded, still clinging to old prejudice. An elderly woman whispered, "But she looks too young to really be a colonel." Gregory seized the opening, his tone louder, shaking with self-righteousness. "Can't you see? This is the lives of 312 people. We need a real pilot, not a pretender." But just then, Alexis's voice came through the cabin speakers, calm and steady as a beacon in the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Colonel Alexis King of the United States Air Force. I have logged more than 2,000 hours in F-22 fighter jets, and I have returned from storms far worse than this. I need you to stay calm. The same skills that brought my comrades home from war will bring you home safe tonight." The cabin fell silent. This time there was no scoffing, no muttered doubt. In her voice they heard truth, control, and something rarer still: trust. Even Elaine Stanton, Gregory's wife, turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Stop it, Greg. She's not pretending. She's saving us." Gregory's mouth clamped shut. He looked around and saw the shift in everyone's eyes. His anger crumbled into shame, then into fear, because he knew every word he had just shouted had been captured by the cockpit recorder. In the cockpit, Ethan glanced at Alexis, his voice trembling but full of respect. "They believe in you now." Alexis gave a slight nod, her eyes still locked on the storm, laced radar. "No, Ethan. They believe in something bigger than me. They believe that when life is pushed to the edge, ability rises above prejudice." The radio crackled. Brigadier General Naomi Chen from McCord Air Force Base spoke firmly. "Spectre, satellite data updated. A stable air layer lies 20 nautical miles to the south. If timed correctly, you can punch through the storm wall in 12 minutes. Alexis answered crisply. "Understood. We will bring them home." Gregory slumped back into his seat, his eyes hollow. In the passenger cabin, clenched hands began to loosen. Silent prayers turned into whispers of hope. The Boeing 737 still roared against the wind, but for the first time since takeoff, it had a true heartbeat guiding it. And that heartbeat pulsed in the chest of the woman the world was only just learning to believe in. The wind screamed like an orchestra from hell, but inside the cockpit, Alexis King did not hear chaos. Her ears caught different frequencies, the heartbeat of the air, the flow of the turbulence. The rumble of thunder transformed into guiding signals. "Ethan, prepare for descent. I need us down to 8,000 feet in 6 minutes. Hold speed steady at 250 knots, no more," her voice rang out, firm and unshaken. Ethan Rivera hesitated for only a moment, then nodded sharply. He followed her orders, his hands, once trembling, now working in sync, as if he had flown with Alexis for a decade. The massive Boeing 777 shuddered, its nose dipping downward. The cabin rocked, screams erupted, a few passengers retched, but the systems held steady. Outside the windshield, walls of storm clouds churned violently, yet Alexis guided the steel giant through them like a masterful dancer, spinning within a furious symphony. Behind her, Gregory Stanton still would not relent. He muttered venomously, "She's experimenting with our lives." Alexis did not turn. Her eyes stayed fixed on the instruments, her voice calm but cutting through doubt like a blade. "I am not experimenting. I have survived hundreds of battles by reading the rhythm of the sky. And tonight, this sky will listen as well." She pulled the yoke, the plane banking sharply left, slipping past a vortex that seemed inescapable. The radar blinked red warnings, but Alexis gave a faint smile. "We are in rhythm now. Ethan, trust me." Ethan looked at the screen, then at her. In that instant, fear gave way to awe. He nodded. "I trust you, Colonel." A violent jolt made passengers scream again, but instead of plummeting, the plane curved smoothly around the turbulent stream and leveled. The sobs turned into silence. People could feel it. Someone had seized control of the nightmare. The radio crackled to life. Brigadier General Naomi Chen from McCord AFB spoke, her voice trembling slightly with astonishment. "Spectre, sensors confirm you just avoided a Category 5 vortex with 99% precision. That's unbelievable." Alexis answered simply, eyes never leaving the storm ahead. "In war, I guided my comrades through walls of anti-aircraft fire thicker than this. A storm is only another battlefield." Gregory heard it, his face flushed, but this time he had no words left to fight back. He lowered his head, gripping his seat so tightly the veins bulged in his hands. In the cabin, a strange silence spread. No more screams, no more cries. Instead, every gaze turned toward the cockpit, where one lone figure bore the weight of all their lives. A young passenger whispered, "She's not flying the plane. She's fighting." And indeed, each movement of Alexis was like a warrior wielding a sword in the heart of the storm. She did not resist the wind, did not fight the thunder. She merged with its rhythm, turning chaos into the music of a deadly dance. Ethan stared at her, his voice breaking with disbelief. "Colonel, you're turning this 777 into a fighter jet." Alexis only gave a brief nod, her eyes blazing. "Tonight, that is the only way to bring everyone home." The storm did not weaken. Instead, it roared as if determined to swallow the Boeing 777 whole. Thunder pounded against the steel frame. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Colonel Alexis King's face in the windshield, calm to the point of coldness. Ethan Rivera reported, his voice taut as a wire. "We are at 12,000 feet, crosswinds exceeding 120 knots. Colonel, if we keep descending, structural failure." "We have no choice," Alexis cut him off, eyes locked on the swirling green and red radar. The stabilizer can take more. We're going down to 8,000 feet, then straight to Seattle. Behind them, Gregory Stanton leapt to his feet, his voice breaking with panic. "She's going to kill us. Dropping this low is suicide. Listen to me, we need to climb higher." Not a single person answered. Passengers who moments ago still wavered now looked at Gregory with cold stares. The truth was undeniable. The plane was still in the air, not because of his shouting, but because of the steady hands in the cockpit. Elaine Stanton gripped her husband's hand, whispering like a plea. "Enough, Greg. She is the only hope we have." Gregory froze, his face burning with humiliation. In the cockpit, Ethan whispered, "We're approaching the landing window. But the crosswinds, they're too strong. Can we land?" Alexis glanced at him, her voice low but solid as steel. "Not can. We must. And the only way is a military landing." Ethan stared in shock. "Combat landing. But this is a civilian aircraft." Alexis tilted her head, eyes flashing in the dark. "Tonight, it's a fighter jet, and we will show the world it can land." The radio crackled. Brigadier General Naomi Chen from McCord AFB spoke. "Spectre, Seattle Tower has cleared the entire runway. Emergency services are lined 500 feet along. The sky is yours." Alexis pressed the button to reply, her voice unwavering. "Copy that. This will be a short field, high-speed landing. Prepare all contingencies." In the passenger cabin, the intercom came alive. Alexis's voice rang out, clear, sharp, without a trace of fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Alexis King. We are about to land. This approach will not resemble any commercial flight you've ever experienced. The plane will shake violently, the speed will be high. But everything is under control. I promise you one thing. I will take you home." The cabin fell silent. Then, like a wave, whispers of prayer mingled with eyes filled with hope. A little girl clutched her mother's hand and asked softly, "Mom, will she save us?" Tears welled as the mother smiled shakily. "Yes, sweetheart. She will save us." In the cockpit, Ethan swallowed hard, his hand already on the throttle. "Colonel, give the command. I'll follow." Alexis drew a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the runway through the pounding rain. "All right. Brace for a storm landing. In 30 seconds, everyone will know why they call me Spectre." Outside, thunder cracked across the heavens. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire sky was holding its breath, waiting for the fateful touch of the woman who had once been scorned at the boarding gate. The Boeing 777 dove like a giant arrow, tearing through the night. Raindrops battered its body like relentless gunfire. The entire passenger cabin held its breath, hearts pounding with every violent jolt. Everyone knew. The next few seconds would decide between life and death. Colonel Alexis King gripped the yoke tight. Her voice rang through the intercom, sharp and measured. "Ethan, hold at 180 knots. Prepare spoilers. On touchdown, full reverse thrust immediately. No hesitation." "Copy!" Ethan Rivera shouted back, his palms soaked with sweat, but his eyes blazing with determination. The runway lights emerged faintly through the storm, flickering like a fragile chain of pearls in the raging darkness. Alexis adjusted the nose, her heartbeat calm, almost unnaturally steady. In that moment, she remembered her late comrade, Sara Delgado. The vow echoed in her mind. Never let prejudice decide who gets to live. 100 feet, Alexis counted aloud. The jet shook violently, crosswinds shoving it 15 degrees off balance. Passengers screamed, many clamping their eyes shut. 50 feet, stand by. Ethan gripped the throttle, his hands slick with sweat. Touchdown! Alexis roared. A thunderous crash shook the plane as wheels slammed the soaked runway. Instantly, the engines howled with deafening fury in reverse thrust. "Reverse thrust full!" Ethan shouted. The spoilers deployed, forming a wall of air resistance. Tires screeched against the drenched tarmac. The entire cabin lurched forward violently. Metal groaned. The fuselage rattled, but instead of skidding out of control, the steel giant slowed at a staggering rate. In the cockpit, Alexis barked, "Hold centerline! Hold heading!" The aircraft wrestled an invisible beast, but each correction from Alexis was precise to the centimeter. The tail whipped left, she countered with a steady hand, thrusters reversing, forcing it back in line. Outside, fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, red and blue lights flashing. Sirens wailed louder than the thunder, sounding like a victory march after a brutal war. 80 knots, 60, 40. Ethan read the speeds, his voice breaking. Then at last, the screeching faded. The Boeing 707 slid a few hundred more meters before coming to a complete stop. The engines went silent. Only the hammering rain on steel and the ragged breaths of survivors remained. In the cabin, silence reigned. 1 second, 2 seconds, then suddenly applause erupted like thunder. Passengers wept, clung to each other. A hoarse voice cried, "We're alive." Tears mingled with sweat across countless faces. The little girl who had clutched her mother's hand sobbed uncontrollably now, whispering, "I knew it. She saved us." In the cockpit, Ethan collapsed forward onto the console, breathing hard, eyes rimmed red. "Colonel, you just did the impossible." Alexis removed her headset, closing her eyes briefly. Her voice carried, proud yet heavy with scars of experience. The impossible only exists until someone dares to make it real. Behind them, Gregory Stanton sat frozen. His expensive suit drenched in sweat, hair disheveled. His eyes locked on Alexis, no longer filled with contempt or doubt, but with bitter acknowledgement. The woman he had once mocked had just saved his life. And his career, his reputation, would soon pay the price. Outside, rows of emergency vehicles surrounded the jet. Their flashing lights reflected in Alexis's eyes. She knew the battle in the sky was over. But the fight on the ground, against prejudice, against the system itself, had only just begun. Rain still drummed relentlessly against the steel body of the jet, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed. Passengers wept, laughed, clapped in waves like a tide crashing forward. Hands clasped tightly together, embraces choked with relief. They had just walked through hell, and the one who brought them back was Colonel Alexis King, the woman who had been humiliated and dragged at the boarding gate only hours before. Alexis unbuckled her harness and rose from the co-pilot seat. Sweat streaked across her face, mixing with the flashing red and blue lights of the rescue vehicles outside. In her eyes there was no triumph, only exhaustion and a deep sorrow. Because to prove she was capable, she had been forced to wager the lives of 312 souls. The cockpit door opened. Andre Lewis, head of airport security, stepped in with a heavy expression. Behind him came FBI Special Agent Carla Nguyen, holding a folder and a phone still glowing with a freshly uploaded video. "Colonel King." Andre's voice was raw, as if he had swallowed glass. I apologize. The actions of Officer Owen Hale were not just wrong. They were criminal. He has been taken into custody at the gate. And there were 7 prior complaints of racial misconduct against him that we ignored. Alexis locked eyes with Andre. Her voice was calm, but each word cut like a blade. "You call that ignoring. I call that complicity." Andre dropped his gaze, unable to respond. Carla Nguyen stepped forward, her tone sharp and precise. "Colonel, we have collected over 40 passenger videos. Every one of them shows Hale using force and making discriminatory remarks. Those clips have already gone viral. Over 1 million views in under an hour. The Department of Justice is escalating this into a federal civil rights investigation." Ethan heard this and paled. He looked at Alexis and whispered, "Everyone. They'll know everything now." Alexis gave a faint nod. She knew the truth could not be hidden, and perhaps it shouldn't be. A trembling voice rose from behind. Gregory Stanton stood there, his expensive suit drenched, his eyes red. He shuffled forward, then suddenly fell to his knees in the aisle before Alexis. "Colonel King, I have to say this." His voice cracked. "I insulted you. I sowed doubt when you were carrying our lives. I believed my money and my status defined human worth. But tonight I learned I was blind. You saved me. You saved my wife. You saved all of us, while I did nothing but add to your burden." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Many passengers nodded. Some wept. They too had doubted, had let prejudice cloud their sight. Alexis stood tall, looking down at Gregory. Her gaze carried no hatred, only profound sadness. "Your apology I accept. But you must understand, forgiveness from one person does not erase the wounds of an entire system. What matters is what you do after today. Because there are countless others like me, forced every day to prove themselves 3 times over, just to be seen as enough." Gregory lowered his head, hot tears splashing onto the damp floor. Carla Nguyen stepped closer, snapping the folder shut, her voice like steel. "Colonel King, all cockpit audio was recorded. Mr. Stanton's discriminatory remarks may be used as evidence, but the choice to make them public is yours." Alexis raised her head high. She looked at Gregory, at Elaine clutching his hand, at the passengers who had just escaped death. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the cabin. "I am not here to take revenge on one man. I want to change a system. If releasing those recordings can spark a greater conversation, then release them, because silence is complicity." The space fell utterly silent. Then suddenly, applause erupted, not the panicked clapping of survivors, but applause of recognition, of respect. Ethan turned to Alexis, eyes shining red. "Colonel, you didn't just save us from the storm. You saved us from the prejudice that has chained us for far too long." Alexis closed her eyes, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. She knew this flight would be remembered in history. But what mattered more was the question it forced the world to face. How many times before had prejudice nearly killed those capable of saving us? And outside, in the pounding rain, the flashing red and blue lights still glimmered, like torches lighting the path toward a new beginning. That night, Seattle did not just witness a miraculous landing. It witnessed a raw truth. Sometimes, the prejudices we carry can kill faster than any storm. Colonel Alexis King saved 312 lives, but more profoundly, she forced the world to look inward and recognize that ability has no color, no gender, and needs no permission to exist. Alexis's story does not end on a rain-soaked runway. It will echo in boardrooms, in airports, and in the smallest choices each of us makes, whether we choose to see others through the lens of doubt or with the respect they deserve. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Type the word courage to remind us that bravery is always present, even in the most unassuming forms. And do not forget to subscribe, so together we can share more journeys where justice and courage always prevail. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes emerge from the seat right beside you.